What's going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 106, I believe, of the Book Binge, where this week I don't want to waste too much time on the intro because, as you can see, the runtime on it is long enough. This week I am having a wonderful discussion, I might add, with Christopher Ruocchio, author of Sun Eater, which I did just receive my merch that I ordered for just in time for the conversation, actually. So I'm looking very forward. I was looking very forward to this one going into it, and I hope that you guys are looking forward to hearing the rest of it. But anyways, that's all that I have for this. I'm going to get out of your face now for the intro. I'll be back in the next video just as always. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoy the conversation that I had with Mr. Ruocchio. I'm rereading Howling Dark now, and I just got through. Sorry, I'm holding it in frame for my main camera here, but you're up there. So I right through Act 1 basically, just
Cool.
escaping the Balmung. So
Awesome.
that's what I got through this morning. I'm like, so good. It might be the best. Actually, Demon White might have the best first act of the series. I don't know off the top of my head. I like them all.
I can never choose either. It's tough. I'm still very happy with really with all of them, mostly with 2 through 6, but
right.
one I feel like I should have outlined at this point since I didn't. If I could do it again, I would, but and not that it's bad. It's just I don't think it's as good as the other ones. But anyway, I don't mean to be a downer or anything.
No, that's all good. I mean, I had wondered. There's one thing that I'd always wanted to ask was like, with continuity changes in Empire of Silence, how much do you think some of those will change your editing of, say, like Howling Dark, for example, as the immediate next one?
Which kind of continuity changes do you mean? Like the edits I made on like the Diamond Edition, or
yeah.
Or
Your
most of those
fixes.
are pretty cosmetic, and some of them like it was mostly like terminological fixes. For example, I did not know because it sounded like a really credible Greek word that Primarch was for a 40k coinage, because I don't know anything about 40k except that I'd heard the word before. I'm like, oh, that's a Greek word, totally. It means first lord, and it's never been used anywhere else ever. It's not a Greek word; it's a fake Greek word. They just actually did a good job.
Oh,
So
it's
I used
only in
that.
40k?
It is only in 40k as far
Oh,
as I can
wow.
tell.
I never would have known
So
that.
it's not in the text of Empire of Silence at all, but it was in the back matter. So I went through in the next books and I made it Magnarch, which is, a great lord, basically, but it's a Latin Greek smush, and that's not very good. So in the Diamond Edition, I'm changing it all to Exarch, which is a real word and works. So, like, it's things like that, right? It's like
Right.
that. I changed Alistair's name's spelling because I like didn't pick the one that has demonic associations, which is like why didn't I do that? It's so obvious.
All
Uh,
right.
so I changed it so it's spelled Aleister Crowley style now, because of course it would be. And my excuse is that it's not really written in the Latin alphabet at all. So like I can transliterate it a different way, and if anyone has a problem, that's fine.
The first time I saw the respelling, I was like, that looks a lot different.
Yeah,
But
it's a really weird spelling. I don't think
yeah, it
anyone else has
is.
ever used it.
I don't think I'd ever seen that spelling before, personally.
Yeah, I sent you the Diamond Edition text, right? Is that what you reread, or?
No, you gave me the DAW version
Oh, okay. I
of the
couldn't
PDF to
remember.
reference stuff,
W-
because when you sent me the PDFs, you said that the diamond was still being cleaned up.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, it must not have been done yet, because it took a while, actually, because listening to the audiobook is like painful for me. I'm not Kanye West. I don't enjoy listening to my own music. It's like
It's fair
it's pretty
enough.
rough. It's pretty rough. So I could get through like 2 or 3 chapters a day and be like, okay, that's enough of that. Um,
Right, especially
um,
with how different it is. I did a collab on my channel with Jonathan from Words in Time, which, have you appeared on his channel at all yet?
yeah, that's great.
Okay. I couldn't remember if you had or not. I'm thinking, like, I know Philip Chase was on there, but I don't remember if Christopher had been. So I did collab with him recently, and it became 2 videos, one that's already out, one that comes out at the end of this month. And one of the things that I had commented about loving about Sun Eater was the prose and the quality of the prose, except that going back to Empire of Silence, when I had started the reread of it, I had notably marked, was like, this is a lot different than Ashes of Man was, because Ashes of Man was probably one of my favorite books to just like read prose wise. And it was only like Kingdoms of Death and Ashes of Man that really had that in my mind, where it was like the prose is one of the things that is so great. But a lot of other people love the prose through the series. But for me, going back to Empire of Silence, I was really like, yeah, it was good prose, but it's nowhere near what you would come to
It's
do.
10 years of difference.
Yeah.
The Delos stuff is actually about 3 years older than the rest of Empire of Silence, because mostly the Delos stuff didn't get edited. I had 2 DAW editors, and the first one like basically dropped an atomic bomb on the original manuscript, and the second one like never did any work at all. And so the Delos stuff didn't really get changed. There's a couple things added to it, but it was more or less the same. So some of that stuff I wrote when I was like 17,
Oh, wow.
maybe,
Yeah.
like maybe 17. I'm
It's good
30
for a
now, so
17-year-old, but yeah, nothing like Ashes of Man material, because yeah, Ashes of Man just reads so beautifully.
thanks, man. It's
Same with some of those stories in Tales 3, which I was like, it's so good after rereading most of Empire of Silence. Makes a big difference.
Yeah, no. I'm glad to hear somebody can like see the improvements too. I might, to sort of tie back to the earlier point, is one of the things that gives me a lot of anxiety is just like I know that first book is my worst one. Like it's still good, but like if I actually were giving myself an anonymous Goodreads reviews, like it'd be like at most a 4, right? Like
Right.
I'm very happy with how the rest of them have come, but like I am uh not as happy with the first one these days. But like you can't say that publicly, right? Because the
Right.
people are like, ugh, unless you're like
You
Gene
can't
Wolfe and you're just like, yeah,
advertise it that way.
yeah, you can.
Yeah,
You
a
just
lot of,
like, yeah, because I also hate when people are like, the first 2 seasons of the show, terrible, but like season 3, that's like you got to get there. And like, I'm not gonna watch 40 episodes till I get to the good one, so I can't, in good conscience, ask people to do the same thing. So I'm just like, yeah, we'll just not talk about the fact that I
right.
think I could do better now.
A
But
lot of people get on my case when I mention it that way, but I only do it with people who are in the middle of the book and are just like, this is good. But then I always say it in the way that's just like, if you think this is good, just wait. Like, Howling Dark immediately just takes everything so much higher. Because if you like Empire of Silence, you're going to love everything else. And if you're not amazingly hot in Empire of Silence, I always tell people at least give Howling Dark a shot because it's such a huge upgrade. At least,
yeah,
you know.
I also had a deadline, right? So like that's when I'm like, oh, I really need to outline. Otherwise, like this is just not going to get done because I can't just
Right.
like because like you can't actually just like noodle at a manuscript for 12 years. That's like not a good way to have a career. Unless you're already making 8 figures. You can't like you can't like not actually have a plan and just be like, oh, we'll figure out how to get all these characters through the Battle of Marine. It'll be fine. Like eventually, I'll just feel it out. I'll
Right.
write thousands of pages to throw away. Like
Full
that's
of
a good
George
plan.
R. R. Martin.
Yeah, I don't understand that process at
There,
all.
like,
It's
the way that I heard it was for one character's story arc in Feast for Crows slash Dance of Dragons, because they were basically one book split into 2, as far as I'm
yeah,
aware.
no, that's true. Yeah,
Was one of the characters, one of the POVs especially, he wrote like 3 different times in its entirety to figure out which one was the best version. It's like, well, no wonder it takes you 6 years to release
yeah.
Dance of
It's
Dragons, even though
it's
it's the
so it's
second
so
part of Feast for
wasteful.
Crows. Right.
I listen to that and I'm like, wow, life is like way too short. Way too short to do that. That's such a waste of my time. Like I can't imagine why you wouldn't just come up with a plan in advance. This is so baffling. So baffling to me.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
he knows where it's going to end apparently, but how are you supposed to get there effectively or efficiently? right?
Yeah, I have no idea, right? Because there are like no roads either, right? He's like orienteering. It's just
Yeah,
like,
exactly. He's carving the paths and deciding which one is, the right one, the path of least
yeah, one of
resistance,
these
so
is
to
gonna
speak.
get to Oregon, but like the odds of us getting dysentery on the way are like 200%. It's just
Oh
it's
man.
so insane.
Like
I could never work that way.
the only time I can like see it being like justified is if it's just not working. Like Pierce Brown when he was writing Lightbringer apparently threw away however many hundreds of thousands of words because he was trying to write it twice and it just did not work either time. And it was also in the midst of the pandemic too, so mentally that comes with its own thing, but like even that was like that's a lot of words to just throw away. If it's not
Yeah.
working, sure, but
Okay, cool. All right. Well,
the
I'm ready to roll when you are.
yeah, so the first thing, especially since this is what you mentioned just before we hopped on the call, is that you're working on the Disquiet Gods revision. How far are you into that at this point?
Yeah, so
Which I should
it's hard
clarify,
to.
we're recording this in the beginning of August. So by the time you're seeing this in the beginning of September, you'll be a little bit further along, but this is just kind of where we are at the moment.
So actually, I should be done by the beginning of September because it's due on the 5th.
The
Whatever the
5th.
Wednesday is after Labor Day is the due date. Because the whole Bane editorial staff is going to Dragon Con, and I'm sure they will not be working on Tuesday. And they may not be working on Wednesday either, but it's due that week after they all
Right.
get back from the convention. So I'd better be finished a month from now, and I think I will be. It's mostly pretty minor stuff. The hard step is already done. I've talked about this on my own channel, but the book when I finished was 318,000 words long, which is about let's say 2/3 of a Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone longer than Demon in White was. I use Harry Potter as standard weights and measures for people.
Fair
And
enough. Fair enough.
yeah, since everybody's broadly familiar with them. But so it was pretty long. It was longer than it was like longer than A Game of Thrones by about 20,000 words. Um, and longer than Demon in White by about 30,000. So I had to cut it down. Bane didn't give me an exact word count that I needed to get it under. But it's long, and long books are very expensive, and it was in it's in every author's interest, right, to like try and make the margins better for their publishers and all these things,
Right.
right? So I
Right.
needed to cut the book down. I've done that. I've got about 40,000 words out of the book. I've been through the whole book already, and I've trimmed, yeah, just about 40,000 words out. It's 281 thousand now, and so that was all done by cutting not entire scenes, but by cutting like maybe an odd paragraph here or there, but mostly cutting like supporting clauses and things out of sentences. Just some of Hadrian's dramatic rambling got
Oh,
trimmed
right.
down a little bit. So because I didn't want to lose a scene, right? We didn't want to lose anything substantive. And actually, my goal is to try and cut a little bit more. There's a sequence I have my eye on that I might be able to trim down, and if I can do that, I can actually add a chapter in because there's something I'd still like to add if I can. But I have about 3 pages of bullet points for things that I want to get fixed, and some of them are like pretty major. It's like rewrite this chapter, but some of them are pretty minor. Like, hey, you didn't decide what this thing looked like until page 300, but it's in the whole book. Can you please describe it sooner? Right? Things like that. So actually, that's literally what I was doing right before
All
that.
right.
Very, very minor spoilers. Hadrian obviously has a new sword, and I like didn't describe it until like 2/3 of the way through the book. So
Oh, okay.
I needed to go and like add a couple descriptive, phrases here and there just to get that in there. So I'm doing stuff like that. Mostly that's not that bad. And then the other thing I'm doing is all of the foreign language translating, which is
Right.
honestly, like I always say, it's my least favorite step whenever it's the step I'm on. Like reviewing copy edits is it can be rough sometimes, right? But whatever I'm doing is usually the problem, right?
Right.
And translating all the foreign language stuff is a huge pain in the neck. Mostly because I really did it to myself. My Cielson notes are actually in it's on the desk for once, are in this notebook, which is like, as you can see, it's like an old college notebook of
Yeah, I
mine.
was like, that looks
I've had it for a long time, and They're in like no particular order even. So
Oh no.
because I've been building the language on like a sentence by sentence basis. So like if I don't need like subjunctive mood, right, for the first like 20 sentences I translated, I don't have a rule for it yet. And then the sentence that introduces the mechanisms for subjunctive mood is like buried somewhere in the notebook, and it's not systematized. It's just all basically book by book. So like all the Empire Silence stuff is right at the beginning, and then all the Howling Dark stuff, and so on and so on. And so it's like a huge mess. And so sometimes Cielson will have like two words for and, because I just couldn't find what the word for and was, and I just made up a new one and accidentally, because like, oh, I didn't have a word for and. But I did, and I found it like later. I'm like, okay, so there are just two words for and now, which is fine. Latin has two words for and,
Right, right.
so we'll just make it work. So I've been plugging away at that. Of course, it's not just Cielson. There's a fair amount of Jadian in Disquiet Gods, and a couple other
Yeah,
languages.
yeah.
So and those are much rougher. So those are in a certain way easier, because like I don't have notes to sort of check on, because those human languages are all supposed to be descendants of current languages. And so mostly I just sort of play with Google Translate and like try to make things sound uh sounds like really, this is not a great thing to say about real languages that people speak, but so it sounds cooler, right?
Oh, right.
To like, yeah,
Well,
so like
yeah, because there are some languages that looking at it written down doesn't spark
it, it
anything.
it doesn't work for like an English speaker, right?
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
like one of the ways that I try when I'm making these sort of human pseudo conlangs is I just try to um make it a little bit more accessible often, especially with like Tavrosi is based on Southeastern Asian languages, which are like very different than English and Romance languages, stuff like most Americans are familiar with. So some of the phonemes are just really hard, and I sort of will make the words a little bit easier, so that it, because you don't want your and I do this with the alien stuff too. I mean, the alien Celestial languages really Latin and Japanese, because those are the languages I'm most familiar with. It's got its own phonology, but the phonology is still pretty Japanese. And the point is, a lot of
Yeah,
science
I had
fiction
noticed that
languages,
actually, regarding
yeah,
the phonology. I don't think I'd ever like markedly noted it, but when you say it, I'm like, yeah, that's obvious.
yeah, no, every syllable in Cielson is a consonant and then a vowel, the same way it is in Japanese. Now it's not as limited as Japanese. Japanese only has 47 sounds, I think.
Yeah,
Cielson
it's
has
not
more
that
than
many.
that, but the only times that is Cielson where it ends in something other than a vowel, it's MN, which is sort of like Japanese. You can end a word in N, but it could be an R as well. But it's pretty limited, so it sort of takes inspiration from that. So I'm sort of rambling on this subject, but I'm working on doing that right now, which is not my favorite step, mostly because I made the work really hard on myself. But that should be done. The language stuff should be done in about another week. I have like 40 lines left. Oh, and they're all the hard ones, because I like knocked the easy ones out early.
Right, yeah, get them out of
Because
the way.
like, oh, I have to do 5 today. I'll do all the one word ones. Um, and so I end up with like the complicated ones at the end, and like, oh, thanks, past me.
Meanwhile, I'd
Um,
be the opposite way. I would get all the hard ones done earlier just so that I don't have to do them later.
yeah, I
That's how I
every
get
now and
past my
then,
procrastination, is the sooner I do it, I don't have to do it later, and then it's not a problem anymore.
yeah, every now and then I'll do that. I'll have a good day. I'll sit down. I'm like, all right, we're doing languages. Let's do a really like complicated one today, because that'll be fun and it'll sound really cool when I'm done. And then like the rest of them on those days are usually like 2 words, right? It's like, oh, I already know what stop is. But we can just go
Right.
to the old spreadsheet for that. But yeah, no. So I've been plugging away at that. I'm sort of dreading the Jadian part, because you know, uh, again, making it sound cooler is like not really the best way to describe it. What I'm trying to do is sort of take the languages that it's descended from, right, and put them together in a way that like works for for English readers,
That
right? And
is
so
attractive to a reader who is unfamiliar with the language it's based off.
Right, because
you know?
so many science fiction languages just sound awful, and they just like look bad. Like I hate Klingon. Like it's just disgusting. It's like kind of supposed to be, but like it's just awful, and I can't. I just can't with it. It is not my thing.
This is one of the
But I'm
things
spoiled
that,
because I grew up with Elvish, right? And like
oh
those are the
yeah,
best.
with
Yeah, those are the
with
best fantasy
Tolkien.
languages. So
Yeah.
yeah, no,
And
between Quenya and Sindarin, man, like oh no, I can't look at Klingon seriously.
that's one of the things
So
that working on my own project, I'm thinking in terms of like languages or anything like that. I think a lot of it is either going to A, just be, derivatives of like small stuff where, you know, like if different peoples are using a different language, I'm basically just saying they're speaking a different language. You're not going to hear what those words are because I'm not going to attempt to write them, whether
sure.
because they're a real language and I don't want to mess up translation because I don't speak the language, or because I don't want to make up a language. That's another one of those, you can tell it's a made up language and it doesn't work. Don't want to have linguists analyzing, being like, all of these things don't make sense.
Yeah, well, then you run into where I've run into a little trouble with like translators, right? The Lothrian word for like party member sounds like a very rude word in Russian, and
I can
so
see it. I can
uh,
see it.
And so my Russian translator was like, "Yeah, we had to like sort of fudge that one a little bit, but on the whole, you did a pretty okay job." And I'm like, "Thanks, Yuri." You know, but it's an interesting, it's a whole like interesting sort of angle to the whole process. But I'm working on that, and then I've got this like list of other sort of structural things that I wanna get done. And very often at this point, I'll look at notes that I made like 6 months ago and be like, yeah, I'm not going to do that anymore. Like, I don't think we need it, right? So a lot of the list might just go away. It's like possible I could be done next week,
Right.
depending on like how I feel about a lot of the notes I made. But maybe it'll be like right down to the wire. But by that sort of second week in September, it should be all done.
Right. And that's something that I found interesting when I was revising my own novella that I wrote last year, was as I was writing, if I came up on something while I was writing, it was just like, this needs to be foreshadowed earlier or needs to be, fixed for something earlier, I would go and replace it, and go into my outline and make revision notes, which is like, for revisions, this thing. And then when I did all the revisions, I would say like 10% of those notes was just like, I don't even know what I'm referring to, firstly, or
Yeah, that
this,
happens.
or I would look through whatever the revision was and be like, oh, that's actually perfectly fine, you know?
Yeah, yeah, no, it happens a lot. There was another one I had earlier today where it's like, make sure you didn't use this word too many times, right? And so you'll hit Control F and you go through the whole book and you're like, no, this is fine. Like, why was I worried about this? It's like, 60 times in the entire book. Like, we're fine. 60 out of almost 300,000 is not a big deal.
Right.
So,
It's one of those things that's like Zipf's law or whatever it's called. If you were to pull up the frequently used words list, because that's the thing that I have in Scrivener, and see the approximate ratio of stuff, it's just like, oh, this is all fine.
yeah, it's totally okay. So it's like stuff like that. And then so hopefully it won't be that bad. It's hard. I much prefer writing the first draft to doing the sort of rewriting stuff. This is one of the reasons I outline so heavily, is to minimize the amount of work I have to do in this phase, because I am a very sort of linear thinker, and so having to look at stuff, like the spaghetti in the Flash movie, and be like, how does changing something in chapter 17 change something in chapter 5? Like I hate doing that. Like my brain is just like, can we quit please?
That's why
Um,
I'm working so
yeah.
heavily on outlining stuff, which we can get to a little bit later when we get into more general topics. But what do you think we can expect from Disquiet Gods? And basically, as spoiler free as you can get it, because it's book
Yeah,
six in a very
let's start with
heartbreaking series.
yeah. So I don't know that I don't know that it's as heartbreaking in the way that the last two are, but I will say this, with all the humor I can muster, my mom says it's the best one. So she finished reading it like last weekend and is immediately rereading it. So I'll take that as a as a compliment.
Mom
So
certified, let's go.
yeah, yeah. So it was funny, right? Like my mom is really the reason that like I am such a big fantasy fan in the first place. She was not a huge reader, really. I mean, they always encouraged me to read, my parents, but my mom was really into like 80s B like sword and sorcery movies. So I grew up watching like Highlander and the Beastmaster, and so like this is like totally like right up her alley. My dad, not so much a science fiction guy. Like he likes Star Wars fine, but like that's about the limit of it. Dad reads my books, but they're like the only fiction books he reads.
Oh, right. They're just
Where
because
but
you're a
my
son.
yeah, basically, yeah. My dad's not a big reader. He's like he's an engineer. He's a very like a very, very numbers guy. But my mother does love the book, and she is like she's like actually like a big SF kind of person. So that's actually like not a bad metric. So I'm pretty happy with that. But yeah, no, it started rereading it immediately, so it is a good sign. I do think she's probably right. This book, there seems to be like like an inverse correlation between how much I hate working on the book and how much everybody else likes it. So
Because you didn't
with
enjoy
like
working on Demon and White that much in the finale, did you?
yeah, Demon and White was a pain in the butt. Yeah. I think I had to stop and re-outline the Battle of Berenice sequence like 3 times. We were talking before we started recording about throwing things away. I got like
Right.
halfway into the battle, yeah, like 2 or 3 times, like this is just not working, and then I had to throw it out and start like 5 chapters ago over again a couple times. That was not fun. It went on a really long time, and I was also when I was working on that one, Jenna and I were planning a wedding, and so it was just like a really like just a
Oh,
tough,
yeah.
stressful period, and so that book was pretty odious. And I also had like 2 weeks to edit it because the turnaround time
Oh,
from my editor was like so brief. He was so late getting me notes back that I had like 2 weeks to turn it around, and it's not a small book, so um, it was I was really worried about that one, but everybody basically says it's the best one, which is cool, So I'm hoping I can finally dethrone Demon and Light with this one. That's sort of my goal.
that would be cool. I mean, when I
Uh,
finished Demon and White, that final chapter was like one of those really, really cool moments, and I was like, this might just top Howling Dark. But more time that goes by, I'm more solidified in having Howling Dark be just above Demon and White for me. But actually, for me, I think most of the reason for that is because the middle sequence, everything that isn't the action-packed first act and the action-packed third act, was just a little bit slower in a way that I appreciated, but it wasn't like Howling Dark where it just had these, had this flow
yeah,
that
yeah,
went
yeah.
from thing to thing every time. But, they're so close to each other that it's hardly worth noting, and I think most other people feel the same. But
Yeah,
Howling Dark
this
is
is
good.
partly why Demon White gave me so much anxiety. Is Howling Dark just went so well. I had Howling Dark finished before Empire of Silence came out. Like
Ooh.
I was just so ahead of schedule. There were like no problems. Everything was great. And then Demon and White was just a miserable, terrible time getting that book done. And I was like, this book is terrible, and it's like not as weird as Howling Dark was, and I don't think people are gonna like it as much. And everyone's like, bro, this one's way better. And I'm like, what?
Well,
So I
except
have
for when Demon White does get weird in the middle of it,
sure.
and everybody knows if they've read it, and it
It,
gets it gets weird, but
it has its moments.
I
This
loved
one,
it.
I will say, I think Disquiet Gods is the weirdest one. Uh,
I
and
can
that's
believe
partly
it.
why it was so hard. Is I did not make it easy with myself on the world building. I'm not writing about easy things like walking down the street. So there's like a lot of logistical nightmare stuff with this book that was hard. Um, and but it is I think it's a lot weirder. It is both darker and not as dark as some of the previous entries in different ways, I think. So
Right.
um
So compare it to
I
like say the way that Kingdoms of Death was dark through most of well, frankly most of the middle of it, all the way
yeah,
through
it's
scene.
it's yeah,
Well,
it's
all the
not
way to the end,
quite
quite frankly.
yeah, pretty much the end, it's not dark in that way.
It's
Mostly
not like
because
a
like
heavy type of dark.
I don't know. Heavy is it's still heavy, but it's not as uh I guess bloodthirsty. I guess
Okay, that's a fair
maybe
way to put it, because
maybe is
that
the
is a
right
way to
word.
describe Kingdoms of Death.
Um, but we're still dealing with the skeleton, right? We're dealing with the Watchers, so things are still pretty dire. But but I think people who are like this one that one was a little too much. We'll still be fine with this one. I don't think it is as much in the same way. But
But it's
yeah,
not
trying
like
to
as tonally dark.
yeah, I think that's probably right. Or maybe the subject matter isn't as dark, but the tone still is. Maybe.
I
Um,
guess we'll see when people get
yeah.
it in their
Uh,
hands, right?
yeah. Well, I'll let everyone else be the judge of that. But we have like there's sort of a mystery in this one. There's some more of the old political intrigue. This one feels more like a hybrid of Kingdoms of Death and Demon in White, I think, than anything else. Structurally, it's the most like Demon in White of any of the books in the series so
I
far, in
believe
that
it.
it's like
Being so long, that makes sense.
a one. Yeah. It's got a lot of sort of discrete episodes in the same way too. So it's sort of structured plot wise in a similar fashion. So people who liked that element of Demon and White, the like this is 5 books in one book element, will be happy with this one, I think.
Okay. And
Um,
there is definitely something to appreciate about that, because, there's always something fun about reading a book and getting to, a section and you're just like, this was very clearly the end of part one, even though it's not split into parts. Like, that was the end of part one, and then you start reading the next chapter and it's, very clearly something different. You're like, I had it right on
yeah,
the nose.
yeah. Part of me thinks it'd be cool to like to do the like 1970s versions of this series where like it's actually each book is 4 books.
Oh, right.
And I because you kind of could, but
Even a
no,
white would be
obviously not.
easy to do that way. It's
It's
already
pretty
split
easy to
so
figure
cleanly
out where
into
the
three
cuts are. I
books.
think that's the like manga fan in me, right? Because manga has these very distinct arcs to it, and I tend not to think so much in like Aristotelian like 5 act terms, right? I always get a bit confused when you have these readers who like they've like watched way too much of like Brandon Sanderson's YouTube lectures and things like that, and they come to you like, oh, do you use like the blah 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 plot structure technique? I'm like, no, like I write an outline and as many chapters as I think it needs to have, like it's I don't have or subscribe to a really formulaic way about breaking things down. It just sort of it's one of the elements I think I'm a little bit less deliberate about. Is like, oh, if this we need 17 chapters for this bit and 4 for the next, that's fine.
I mean, I feel like it's one out of every, 4 or 5 writing updates that you post, and you're like, oh, well, I had to add a chapter, or was able to take away a chapter, or just combine it into something else, so you're a little bit more loose with that.
Yeah, I think the fear a lot of people have with outlining is that like you become a slave, right? But you're your own slave actually, right? Because you're
Yeah,
the one who wrote the outline. So like
exactly.
actually you can just go back to being the guy who wrote the outline again and you
Not
can
like your
change the
publisher
outline.
gave you the outlines, just like, write this.
Right, exactly, right. You're not doing like for hire work for Star Wars or something. You
Oh,
can
yeah,
actually
yeah,
like
that's...
totally like make changes. And it's fine. And so but I do tend to think in these sort of like looser um sort of plot arcs rather than like oh, this is act 3 so we can't do any anything that doesn't feel like an act 3 thing, so
The way that
no.
I have been working on my own project, because it's frankly too big, but that's what I signed myself up for. Uh,
Yeah.
but then again, I don't plan for all of the
That's
books to be 200,000 to 300,000 words. It's more like 100 to 150,000. It's like that's where I want them to be. So
yeah,
I can
you're
get away
smarter than
with
me.
10 to 20 books different than if each of them was the size of Demon and White. That's big different story. But when I've been outlining all my stories, it's been like, initially I did my first stage of pre-writing, as I called it. It was like initial summaries. It was 3 paragraphs doing roughly the 3 acts of the book, like what's going to happen over the 3 primary stages. Then the next one was an expanded summary. I just split each of those paragraphs into more. So 3 paragraphs became 9 paragraphs. And then I'm going into the actual outlines, and that's what I've been working on for the last few months now, is going through and making pretty much 5 parts of books based off of these approximate 3 acts. but I'm not actually beholden to any of those summaries too much now. In this third book that I'm working on, I discover like my summaries there, none of that is in this.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like all those tools should like serve you as the writer, right?
Yeah,
Like
use it for
they shouldn't make
reference.
your life harder. And if they are, you're not you haven't found your process yet. If your process is making your life miserable in some way, it's not your process.
That's what I
Um,
discovered doing my novella.
yeah.
Again, that's another thing I'll reference. When I was writing that, and I actually did an outline, and it was a 3,000 word outline for a 35,000 word novella, and I was like, I have an idea of what I can do now, and that's going to work. And that's what I've done here. And it's a very intensive process. There's so much in the pre-writing as I'm putting it, but that'll make writing it so much easier.
So much easier. Yeah. Like as a kid, I never outlined anything for school, right? Like essays and things like I
Same,
hated it. It was like
same.
I was like I like one, it's like 5 paragraph essay. I do not have to outline it. That is insane, right? And like you probably don't, right? But I was like so resistant to the idea that I should have to do extra work to do the work. And partly that's because like it's a school assignment, you're being assigned it. You don't want to talk about, I don't know, the Scarlet Letter. Like who does, right? I don't like that book. But
I
yeah,
haven't read it yet.
yeah, I'm not a Hawthorne guy, but but a perfectly fine book, just not my thing. But like, I don't want to write this essay. Like you're kind of resentful of it anyway. So like all the way through school, I was like, I'm not doing extra work to do the work. I'm gonna write the essay. And for me, I found that like it wasn't a problem. But like we talked about this a little before the call when I turned to book one, because book one I didn't outline either because I had like infinite time to write it. Right, I just worked on it
Right.
all through college. They're like, cool, we want
Oh no, you're breaking up a little bit on my end. 1 second.
book two in a year, and it was like, and oh,
Oh, there we go. Okay, you came back.
oh,
You
sorry,
were,
yeah.
yeah, you were stopped and paused for like 3 seconds or something where it just lagged. It's all good.
Okay, cool.
You're back.
Cool. Yeah. So with the first book, I didn't really outline it because I had sort of like infinite time. I was working on it all through college. But the second book, they come back and they're like, "Hey, we want that in a year." So I had to sort of rethink my whole process, and that was when I started outlining, and it saved a lot of headache and a lot of hassle just having sort of written ahead of everything, and outlined where I was going. It was, I think a lot of writers it's idea block because you can have writer's block and then go on Facebook and see something that upsets you and write a 3,000 word comment in reply, right?
Right.
Like you can write, it's there. Somebody just had the wrong opinion about some movie you like or something. Yeah, you can still turn the words out, but if you don't have a clear vision of what the scene is, right, then it's harder to write it, and outlining like solves a lot of that clear vision problem for me
Yeah.
at least.
And different types of
And so
writing
I
are
did.
different anyway. Like
Oh,
when
that's
I'm
also
when I'm
true. It's like,
making notes for my videos, I can churn out, 5 videos worth of notes and have each of them be 500 words and do that in just a few hours easy versus writing 2,500 words in, a book or an outline or something. That's a much different story. You're using your brain in a completely different way.
yeah, that's one of the great frustrations of my life is exactly that, right? I can go and write like I don't know, like I'm describing cover design for one of the artists or something, and I write like 1,000 words of notes on what I think would be a good idea in like 20 minutes, an hour, whatever. And then go back to writing, and I'll work for an hour and be like 300 words. No, I'm never gonna be done.
Oh man, yeah, that
Um,
that reminds
yeah,
me of the work that I've been
the
doing on
worst.
my outline the last few days because I did like 5 days worth of it in a row or something like that. First time that I've done more than like 3 days in a row in the last couple months. Let me pull it up.
Sweet.
Yeah, and I got like 1,700 words done on the 7th. What day was the 7th? On Monday. And then I did not get above 750 words over the next 4 days. So,
Yeah, yeah, it do be like that sometimes. I don't even count a day anymore if I don't hit 1,000 words. Which with the baby meant that I didn't count a lot of days for a little while. I'm not quite back up to full strength, but I'm like maybe at like 85% the output where I used to be now, which is good because for a while it was like 50. But
that's
the last
respectable.
like 2 weeks working on this Lorien novella, like everything sort of like came back online. which was good because I was starting to be like, I am never gonna finish this darn thing.
Gonna have to
I'm
delay
gonna be
everything.
trapped. I'm gonna be trapped on Belusia with Lorien forever. Yeah, no, it was getting rough, but it's done. So that's good. And even the outline could not save me. I was just like, this is just not. I'm so tired.
Right,
But
right. I
we
expect
are
I'll have the
there
same
now.
problem when I get to actually writing my books because I'm doing all of my outlines first because
Oh shoot,
it's a
okay,
big
for like
thing.
the whole
It's a
series.
big thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm like doing it all so that I can revise them all with each other to get, the major stuff revised so that there's no so I'm not changing things, at the very end versus the very beginning. That's just like, okay, well now I need to put out a different edition of the first one, right? So, but yeah,
Yeah,
that'll be its own thing. But
yeah.
is that kind of part of why you write short stories in between all the big books too, is to give your brain a little bit of a breather while still writing?
Sort of, yeah. It's partly that. It's also partly the case too, right? Part of what frustrates me writing generally is that like it takes a really long time to finish a book, right? For me, it
Right.
might be. I think Disquiet Gods 280 something days. I think of like active work. Um,
That's
maybe that's beginning to end, counting like the days I didn't work. But it's
either
like a
way,
long time to.
that's basically a year's worth of work days if you calculate it based off a 5-day work week, It's like
Yeah, which I
260
do
work
not
days
do.
in a year.
I
So that's a
I
long
work
time.
basically every day, which I shouldn't do. I should really. I've been trying to get to where I take at least Sunday off, but I've just been so behind. And I tell myself it's not really work because I love it so much. But it's not necessarily sustainable. But it takes a long time. You don't cross anything off your list, and so short stories like you can cross off your list in like a week, right, or a couple days, and it feels nice to complete things. So so partly the short stories just are therapeutic in a sense because one feels better having accomplished something. So it's partly that, and it's partly because, and this is really the real reason, is that as a writer in 2023, you're not just competing with other writers, and that's like an uncharitable way to put it, because at the same time, other writers actually are helping each other, right? It's not the case that like, oh, they put more Tolkien books in Barnes and Noble than me, right? So like,
Well,
I'm not getting
obviously,
sales because
like
Tolkien's taking my sales, right? Because it's obvious, right? Tolkien's not taking my sales.
Tolkien's
Tolkien
taking his
is
sales.
he's taking his sales, right? But he's also getting people in the store in the first place, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And like other writers actually help each other out just by existing because they create a culture of readership. And so, maybe the Venn diagram of like my readers and Stephen King's readers is like barely overlapping, for example, right? Obviously, his circle is much bigger than mine.
Right.
But he gets people in the store, right? And maybe they see my book and they're like, that looks cool, right? And so too with like every other, like maybe like maybe someone's mom is a big Diana Gabaldon fan and she drags their kid to the store and like, you go pick out a book, Timmy, right? And Timmy picks up my book or some other book, right? And just the fact that other writers exist at all helps other writers. So like
Right.
I
That is
hate
a
to
big point.
say competing with other writers because you're not really doing that, but you are competing for people's attention because they can only read one book literally at a time, right? They can't like do this, right? Maybe someone can, but I can't.
Or
um
you can read 20 books at a time like a friend I know, but you're not actively reading every one of them, you know?
at exactly the same time, right? You
Yeah.
are competing for people's attention, right? But you're also competing with people's attention with the cinema and video games and YouTubers, right? And
Right.
YouTubers can put out content every like 5 minutes if they really wanted to, right? Streamers don't ever have to stop. And so if I'm only putting out a novel a year, right, there is like a real fear like, will the audience forget about me, right? Oop, hit my mic. Will the audience forget about me? Because that's not a very high frequency, and so the short stories give me other events, right, to have happen and to tell people about. And so now I'm at this place where the next book's not out until April, sure, but I have a novella that'll be out probably October, November, right? I have a short story collection that should be out just around the time this video comes out. I'm just waiting on the cover at this
Right,
point,
yeah.
and I have to go over the copy edit still, but it's pretty close to done. And I've got a special edition of those two things put together coming, and I have a special edition of my original book coming, and so there's all this other stuff going on. And everything that you have, even if it's something that people don't get, right? Maybe you're somebody who like doesn't read short stories, or you didn't get a copy of the Kickstarter version of Empire of Silence, whatever, right? The fact that I'm talking about it, right,
There's a
keeps
buzz, and that
me
it
present.
keeps you
Yeah,
relevant
exactly.
to some degree amongst at least a number of people.
Exactly, and so it behooves you as a writer to have these other projects going on, just because it helps you to market yourself and to command the attention of readers and things like that. So that's really the reason I started doing the short stories. Because as a traditionally published writer, I only get paid twice a year or whenever I turn something in, basically. So, like a traditional contract, you get a little bit of a payment when you sign the contract. You get a bit when you turn in the manuscript. You get a bit when the hardcover comes out, and then you get a bit when the paperback comes out. And maybe you only get a bit when the first edition comes out. Depends on the contract, right? But you usually get paid in like thirds or quarters or something like that. And so as a consequence, I don't necessarily get a paycheck every month, right? And so um, the short stories were a way to, diversify my pay schedule as well, right? There's a little bit of a business angle to it. So
Right,
those do pay monthly. And it's not enough for the mortgage, but it's maybe enough to pay for like the car or something, right?
right.
And so
Any
as
little
as a
bit
writer,
helps, basically.
yeah, exactly. As a writer, it behooves you to sort of find as many income streams as possible. And so, something I can write, in a week, I do that 4 or 5, 6, 7 times, put a little collection together, put that out like that. That helps, right? That's another good thing to do. So,
That's
um,
also an interesting point because it wasn't that long ago, maybe a few months or something. I don't remember when Mike did a call with Ryan Cahill, who's an indie writer, but
yeah, yeah,
his way of seeing it is he's done a little novella in between, basically in between each of the main books. So he has three of the main books out. Fourth one is coming at some point soonish. I think he's finishing up on that. I don't know the exact schedule, but he also has three novellas, and one of those is coming out very soon. But so he says, like, well, I haven't written and released three books. I've released 6 books. Three of them are shorter, but that's 6 books. And from some sort of view on the writer's side, that it makes a big difference in attention that can bring, especially considering that one of those novellas he has as a free ebook on his newsletter, which is a marketing way of doing things where people are just like, no, you need to be paid for that. It's like it gets eyes on my work. There's a lot of different aspects to that, I guess. So that
yeah.
makes
No,
sense.
no, that's a totally good way to do it. By no means, the things I'm saying are original, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Means there's
A lot of
some
people
truth
have
to it.
reach the same conclusions, yeah, that I did. Even if you're traditionally published, right, you should think about traditional publishing as like one tool that you have in your utility belt, right? So the indie stuff is one thing, the crowdfunding stuff is another. There are lots of different ways to be successful, right? And it's this is something I remember when Brandon Sanderson did his Kickstarter that he was talking about, right? He had this letter he wrote explaining why he was doing what he was doing and talking about how, there are different price points that books can come out at, for example, right? They can be very, very expensive and they can go all the way down to like dollar ebooks, right? Or free even. And, those all actually are targeting different customers. Right now, there's some overlap in those customer bases. But, I have a couple thousand like really dedicated readers, and like that sort of like you need to take care of your core audience. And so
Yeah.
um not everybody's going to read the novellas and stuff like that, but especially those core readers, I want to do stuff for, right? I want to take care of them, and I don't want them to fall away. So the short stories help to serve them, right, and entertain them, and all of that stuff, because writers actually do owe their audience something if they want to keep their jobs. unless they're, wildly successful. Actually, we do owe our readers something. You wouldn't say that like a doctor does not owe someone, doesn't owe their patient medical care, right? Or, a chef does not owe, customers food at their restaurant, right? Like, of course they do, right? They're paying for it, right?
Yeah.
So I tend to disagree with Neil Gaiman on this point. But then again, I don't have millions of dollars, so
Yeah, that's fair.
but I do want to produce material for my readers to enjoy. So the short stories are a way to do that, in a time effective way while I'm still working on the big stuff. And with traditional publishing too, you have like downtime, right? I turn a book into my editor. My editor might take a month, or 2 months to get back to me. And what am I supposed to do? Go on vacation?
Right.
Like other people's jobs, they don't get to go on 2-month vacations just because they did their work.
Oh,
Like
yeah,
why,
true.
why should I, right? I should keep working. Like my family needs me to work, so I should I should do something.
I suppose it helps to be a pathological worker, like the way that Jenna likes to describe you, and the way that I describe
Sure.
myself, genuine workaholic. Like if I'm not working on something, I'm going insane.
Yeah,
So
well, it's like it's good for people to do stuff. It's not good to just sit around and collect dust. It's bad for everything. I mean, there's sort of an analogy to health, right? If you do not move, like you will if you literally don't move, you will get sores. you know. And so by the same token, like you should exercise your mind and do stuff, and like this is all actually good for you too. Now you can obviously make yourself sick if you like forget to sleep
yeah,
and
if you
stuff, but
overwork.
I'm not making a case here for not taking care of oneself, but like work is not bad. Like like it's good to do stuff.
I agree on
So
that point, but and speaking of the short stories, just as we kind of hinted at earlier, Tales of the Sun Eater Volume 3 should be out, and if
we should
not, it'll
be
be out very soon.
pretty close. Yeah, I
Yeah.
haven't set a date yet, and I'm not going to, because there are three things that still need to be done. As of the time we're recording this, I have seen thumbnails for the cover, but I have not seen. I'm talking like really rough sketches, like which like way do you want the character positioned? Like no details, right? So I'm waiting on the cover from James Cook, who did the cover for the Diamond Edition. He's gonna be doing this cover. He's gonna redo the other two Tales covers as well. We're
Super
gonna
exciting,
do that.
actually.
Yeah, he's so good. I love all of my artists, but James is so good. Like I've said this before, but like the sort of like '90s Star Wars EU colored pencil kind of aesthetic that is science fiction to me, and James is that guy. And so it's just been very exciting to work with him. Not that I don't love my other artists, but like this sort of look that made me a science fiction fan as a kid in the first place. So to get that for my own stuff has just been really
You
fun.
to tap into it,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, it's just really cool. And so he's doing the cover for that now. He said it should be pretty quick because he teaches art, and semester's starting up soon. So he's trying to knock it out before he gets back to work. So
All right.
I imagine the next like week, 2 weeks tops, I'll probably have the cover. Then we have got to put the text on the cover, which shouldn't take that long.
Yeah,
Um,
just formatting stuff.
yeah,
Figuring
so we got
out
to
how
do
you want
that.
them to be formatted.
Yeah, but that'll take like maybe an evening, 2 evenings. And my wife is my cover designer for the indie stuff, so it's not like I have
A
to like
little bit
wait for
easier
emails
to
to come back in.
coordinate that.
Yeah, we just sort of sit down with the laptop and go for it, right? And so I need to do that. I need to review the copy edit, which you copy edited for me, which is great.
I did.
And so I am gonna gonna go through those probably starting Monday. It's Saturday as we're recording this. I don't know what day it is anymore, man. Between not having to go into an office and having a 2 month old, like I just have no clue.
I just switched
Uh,
to a 3-day weekend schedule, so today's Saturday, but it feels like Sunday, man.
yeah, it's
For
it's
no other
so
reason
bizarre
because
how
it's my second day off.
plastic time is. It's just so strange. But so I need to review the copy edit. I'm going to start that soon. That'll probably just be like a couple days, right? The longer short stories, I'll probably just do one a day. The shorter ones,
Yeah.
I'll knock out two. So like probably by Friday next week, I will be done with that at least. And then I need to get the book typeset. Um, I trying to figure out who I'm gonna have do the typesetting because I want to. I'm not 100% happy with the typesetting on the earlier ones because like the table of contents doesn't work.
Right.
So we're gonna make sure it does this time and moving forward. But once I have all of that done, I can get everything posted up and pick a date. So that shouldn't take very long. Like I said, I'll probably finish the copy edit review by the time I get the cover in. And then it's just a matter of sending it to a typesetter and letting them do their thing. So probably I would expect a cover reveal and a pre-order date for this to be out by the end of August, so before this airs, so people
Yeah.
sort of seen it
Yeah.
already.
So
You
even if
know,
it's not out, we probably know what it is, and I probably featured the image over my part of the screen of the cover just briefly to show you guys, just because it's probably out. But
yeah, it should be by now, but who knows, right? Sometimes things happen. But we're pretty close, and then I'm also working on the Lorien novella, and I'm in sort of the same place. It is at the copy editor now, and I'm just waiting to get that back. I think by the end of the month, I'm supposed to have that back. So as soon as I finish Disquiet Gods, I'll review the copy edit on that. That'll be a little more intensive. Um,
all right, to
and
get it out on time.
Yeah, and so it'll come out a little bit later. It won't be. My goal is to have Tales 3 out in September. So maybe October, the Lorien book will be out. And then we're gonna have the Lorien book combined with the stories in Tales 3 to make the new Anderida books sort of combo special edition. Um, that'll probably be out. I think he said in November. So it'll all be like basically one after the other going into the holidays, and then it'll be quiet until Disquiet Gods in April, I think. So
Got to build up the hype.
um,
Also, let
yeah.
people
Oh,
be able to read the e-arc that they can buy from Bane whenever that becomes available.
that is true. So that would be January. They
It'll be
told me
January.
this last week actually. Yeah. So
Perfect
Bane
timing,
Books
actually. Then.
is super cool. They were doing ebooks before we called them ebooks. They were doing ebooks all the way back in the late 90s. Um,
Oh,
so
really?
they were pre-Amazon. They called them webscriptions, which is not quite as catchy, I admit. But one of the things they started doing is they had their own ebook like retail site. So you could buy ebooks directly from Bane.com. And you still can. And unlike every other science fiction publisher, major science fiction publisher, you can buy the advanced reading copies of Bane Books titles for basically all of their books. And they are more expensive. They're $15. But for that, you can read the book 3-4 months early. And all of the proceeds from that $15 goes directly to me and to the publisher. So there's no retailer, there's no shipping company, there's no extra bit there. So I actually get I think 50% off of that. Which people ask, what's the best way to buy your book in order to give you, which is like a really great question that readers ask. It's very kind of them to do that. But the answer is buy the e-arc in this case. I get like 3 times as much as I would off of the hardcover if you
Right.
buy the book
Right.
early, and you can read it in January instead of in April. So I will
Right.
be putting that link out as soon as I've got it.
Because
And
that's
it
probably
helps too.
something I'll do. Because I'm not huge on e-reading. I don't love reading on screens, but for me, I'm like, this is too big for me. I need to read Disquiet Gods as soon as I can, and easy way to help you as well.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. Now
I would probably purchase it even if I didn't plan on reading it anyway. So that's just
well, I
me.
appreciate that. That is also very kind. But you'll be able to read it, and it is pretty close. It'll be pretty close to final by then. It won't be proofed. I believe it will be copy edited at that stage, but it is still the advanced copy, right? It's not the final book. So there may be a little bit more typos than not. But the book will be done well in advance of that. So sometimes It's been the case that a Bane e-arc is radically different from its final book because the authors are like late turning things in and revisions happen. That won't be the case here. It'll be basically the finished book. There just might be some uglier commas. You know, so if you are the sort of person that does not bother and you want to read the book like 3 months early, you can.
I'll probably
So
be
that'll
doing it.
be yeah,
And
it'll be
also so
cool.
I can
And
review it, when it's released rather than take a month or two to read it and then review it because
yeah, well,
it'll
this
be
is the other
big and I read
advantage.
slow.
This is the other advantage too, is that by doing this, more folks can get reviews in early, and that can sort of help momentum on release, which is very cool. So, but this is a really cool thing, and only Bane does it. I don't know why other publishers don't. I think it's a great idea. Obviously, critics can still, get Yorks, as critics, through things like NetGalley, like you would any other way. So it's not like you can only get the book by paying for it. It's not like that. But if you're just like a normal reader, the sort of person like NetGalley would not approve to get a book, you can totally just go get it anyway. And like I say, the proceeds go directly to the author and to the publisher, which is super cool. So, folks can totally check that out in January.
Well, I'm looking forward to all that personally. Like that'll be big for me. After Ashes of Man just blew me out of the water so much, I'm like, I need the next one. Especially how tonally similar. This is a question about Disquiet Gods. Is certain sections at least of the book compared to Daughter of Swords from Tales of the Sun Eater Volume 3. No
Oh,
spoilers
uh,
for the story, but people who've
I'd
read
say
the story will
totally.
know.
Obviously, the character that Daughter of Swords is about. Her name is Cassandra. I won't say any more for anybody listening who doesn't want to know. Is in Disquiet Gods quite heavily, and so a lot of the sort of tonal notes uh, from that story are present, and from Royal Game as well, which is another short story about her. Um, are present throughout the book, I would say. She's a very major character. She's very involved in the action of the story. She's very important to Hadrian. So uh, it's there. Of course, Daughter of Swords is from her point of view, and Disquiet Gods is not. So
Right.
things are a little bit, reversed. But if you liked Daughter of Swords, you liked Cassandra. If you've read the story already, which right now, the only way to read it is to have read it on the Patreon. But it will be in Tales of the Sun Eater Volume 3. Um, so you will be able to read that fairly soon. If you like
It's
that
the best
story,
story in the collection, by the way.
oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm very fond of it. There's a lot of stories. I'm very happy with Tales 3 in general.
I I I thought it was great.
I
I think it might even top Volume 1 for me. Volume 2 is probably the lowest of the three for me, but Volume 1 also had Parliament of Owls. Uh, but Volume 3 overall has the most stories that I love. So
yeah,
it's
I think
on
I
top
I
for me,
tend
I
to agree.
think.
I think this is the strongest Tales of the Sun Eater volume so far. Um, it does not have a Hadrian point of view story, which makes it kind of odd. Um, but that's okay. So, but I do think it is. I do think it's the strongest of the three. I'm very happy with a lot of the stories in this one. Well, very happy with all of them.
Right.
But it has a couple that are very nearly my favorite, if not my favorite. So,
Well, that's how I
I
felt
really
reading
like
for the copy edit. Like I said, Daughter of Swords I think is the best in the collection. But even the one before that, was it Gutter Ballet that I
Gutter
was
Ballet.
talking
Yeah,
about? I really enjoy. And sure, that one came out in anthology earlier, but
yeah,
that
that's a
one was
reprint.
like near Parliament of Owls level for me. Of course, tonally they are very similar, as we have discussed in DMs before. But yeah, there's some great stuff. After the Feast as the opening story of the collection, really
Yeah,
great.
that
Uh,
one that one was really fun to write too. It's very straightforward. Like I was talking about, like Disquiet Gods is hard because it was weird. After the Feast was easy because it was like a straight line, almost literally down the hallway.
right.
Uh, and it was just
And it was a
I really
setting
like
we already
writing
knew
action.
about.
Yeah, it was a very straightforward story, and it's nice to have one of those every now and then. But it also has my first robot point of view character in it, and actually there were two robot point of view
Yeah.
stories in this one. And but reincarnation is one of them, and that's one of That's one of my favorite things that I've written, kind of period. It was supposed to be in a cyberpunk anthology, but the small press that commissioned the story closed. So that
Unfortunate.
anthology just never happened. Otherwise, it would have been in Tales 2.
Oh,
It's been
really?
sitting around for a while. Yeah.
That would have
Um,
beefed up volume
Tales
two's
2.
length a little bit because it was notably shorter than one was.
Yeah. It is. Tales 2 got in trouble because one of its stories is knowledge, which is like 1,000 words. Um,
Yeah, it's
it's
like three
very short.
pages.
Yeah, it's very, very short. I that story actually is my favorite story that I've written. I think it's really fun. But I was given it was to be performed basically at a poetry slam that I was invited to for science fiction stories, and I was given 10 minutes. So I needed to write something that would fit inside 10 minutes, which is
Fair
about a
enough.
thousand words. So I had really, really tight guardrails on that story. It's that's why it's so short.
I mean, it turned
But
out
I've
great for what it was doing. I appreciated it for a specific reason that I also appreciate in the first act of Howling Dark that some other readers, for whatever reason, attacked me about the first time that I was reading Howling Dark.
I think I know what this is about. This was
Yeah.
yeah, these are the anti-Genon people.
Yeah, I was
Yes.
like, I loved it so much, and
I don't understand why
it was
what
just
the
so funny.
animosity there is about. I guess it's just the Valka stands. Uh,
I mean, I understand, but like, I really appreciated all of that for what it was, like, you know.
yeah,
And of
yeah,
course, it
no,
it all came around anyway. Come on, people.
yeah, no. People are so funny. But yeah, no. So like that story, you know, because it's usually it's they've been 6 or 7 stories a volume, and it just so happened that volume 2 was 6 stories, and because I couldn't put reincarnation in it, uh, and
A
um,
lot of
and
those
one of those
stories were
6 was
shorter.
really small, so that book
Yeah.
ended up shorter. Tales 3 is the longest one too. It's a little bit longer than Tales 1.
I'm
Um,
not surprised because I think all of them were 8,000 plus besides Parable and Iron.
Yeah, I think that's right. They're all pretty long, and and so so that's there's more good news for everybody. Like this is a little bit more substantial.
It's very
Um,
substantial.
so I think everyone will be very happy. And the cover, which again should have should have shown up by now. People should have seen is going to be very cool. I think it's going to be pretty awesome. So
Yeah, I got to take a
uh,
peek at a couple of the rough sketches and pick my favorites of them. And based off my favorite anyway, it definitely has that vibe that Christopher was talking about earlier. That's like, that would make a really
Yeah,
great cover.
so I what was funny about that, right, is James sent me 10 thumbnails and I was straw polling a few people because it is very hard for me to choose these things. And so I often find, I was telling you, I don't listen very often when people tell me what their favorite thing is. I just like I type their opinion and I will have an emotional response to the opinion and be like, that's wrong. I'm not doing that. I'm gonna do the thing that I thought I was gonna do. So I use these polls not to like side with the majority, but to clarify my own feelings.
Right,
But
right.
I
Relatable.
handed them to you and to one other person, and both you and this one other guy picked the three that I was looking at exactly, and in exactly the right order. So I knew I was correct. So thank you for that.
We were your
Uh,
vindication.
yeah, yeah. Well, sometimes people be like, "Oh, I like number 4." And I'm like, "Number 4 is the worst one. What is wrong with you?" Right? But
I
with you and my friend Nick, I turned him in. Everyone is like 7, and I'm like, "Yes, 7 is correct."
I
So
mean,
that
4
was
is
very fun for me.
interesting, but just because it's
Yeah.
different, but yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
I picked. Yeah, I can't remember if it was 4 or not. That I was like, that's not my favorite one. But there were a couple where I was like, yeah, I don't know about that one. But it was like very clear to me what my top 3 were. And so when
Yeah.
people said anything else, I was like, really?
Yeah, I had 4
9?
that I was choosing between basically. And I chose one just because it was a little bit of a different take than all of the others because it was the close up. And so I had that as an honorable mention, technically. But in terms of the top 3, there was only one that was even, in the discussion for it besides the 3 that I picked. So that was interesting.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you, backing up my take there. It was very clarifying. I just thought it was funny. Like the odds of someone having exactly the same top 3 out of 10 are
Not horribly
not good, but it
high.
happened twice. So,
I mean, that
you know,
says something about those three. Like,
yeah,
just from a
the,
statistical standpoint, there's something to be said about that.
yeah. There's something going on there. So I think everyone will be pretty happy. And like I said, James is just so good. So,
I mean, if
so
it's going
that's
to be,
cool.
anywhere near the quality of the Diamond Edition, then clearly.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
it will be. It will be. James is he's just great. There's a new guy who's doing the covers for the novellas. His name is John Ballaran. He is from the Philippines, I believe. He is really cool too. I don't have anything to show for that just yet. But he sent some cover sketches, some like comps and things coming together. I think it'll be pretty awesome. Uh, he was cool. He sent me the most thorough like email asking questions about specific details that I've ever seen. Just like the email is as long as my arm. I was like, oh, this is gonna be great. So I'm very excited to do that because like I said, we're redoing the art for the Two Tales ebooks as well, and those are gonna get sort of remastered just so like the table of contents works in the ebook and things because I know that some of those indie published books have glitches here and there. Working on cleaning those up. We want to bring everything up to standard, but I'm also going to be remastering Queen of Mid Ashes and the Lesser Devil in the coming months as well. Amazon does print on demand hardcovers now, which I believe are library bindings, so the art is printed on the boards. Um,
oh, okay.
so no dust jackets, but they're doing those now, and hardback is cooler than paperback. So I'm gonna bring the novellas up to current standards. We'll get some new art for those, and get everything sort of cleaned up.
Now the paperbacks can be collector's editions.
Exactly. The yes, the first edition print on demand paperbacks. Yeah. Before he paid for the new art. Yeah. Um, so yeah, no, those will be a little bit further down the road. I'm doing them sort of one at a time just because good art is more expensive, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You
It's
know
it's an investment
yeah,
rather
not that
than
the art I
yeah.
have is bad, right? But I want to sort of bring the look of everything up to standard and give those files sort of a do-over since
Right.
I know they some of the technical stuff doesn't work because it's a learning process, right? I had never done self-publishing before, and so we ran into some snags, and it's time to start working things out and sort of redoing everything. So and two, right? We're talking about giving readers new things, right? Re-releasing the Lesser Devil, for example, is like a new event that we can talk about, and we can talk about Lesser Devil again. And I don't have to write a whole new book to do that, and everybody can get a nice new edition, and things will be all cleaned up, and they'll work better. And
Newer readers will figure out that it exists because they might not know, or
yeah, yeah, right, exactly. Like there may be people who are like, "What? The lesser what now?" And that would just be a win. So,
yeah.
there's a lot going on. I fear that I have seemed a little too scattered in explaining all this stuff, but
But it,
it's
it
just
is a
because there's
lot.
there's a lot of like little things going on.
We
So,
still haven't even talked about the one last question that I had that I have noted to ask when you were considering getting to start Howling Dark revisions for that Diamond Edition, because that's
oh yeah,
another project.
yeah, yeah. We'll probably start on that after. Well, I'll start rereading Howling Dark after I finish everything else. I'm not gonna once I get through all this Lorien stuff, all this Tales of the Sun Eater stuff, and finishing up Disquiet Gods. I will probably do two things. I will start rereading Howling Dark and taking notes for revisions because I went through for the collector's edition of Empire of Silence. I went through Empire of Silence again. I listened to it, and I flagged every sentence that sounded weird to me as I was listening to it that I thought I could do better, and I edited the book. Now, in certain cases, this just meant like I changed a word somewhere, or I like fixed like maybe there was a word missing, or there was a word that needed to be cut from a sentence. But at the extreme end, I think I rewrote the entire like 2-page micro chapter before the duel with Gilliam. I think I completely rewrote that
Oh,
chapter.
really? That was the one?
Yeah.
I had I know you had mentioned that you had rewritten one of them, and I figured it was one of the micro chapters in there because Empire Silence has more than the rest of the books do. So
Yeah.
while I was rereading, I was trying to figure out which one of those would have been, but that one actually kind of makes sense.
Yeah. It still says the same thing. It just says the same thing a little bit more clearly, I think. So
Yeah,
I
because
did a lot of quality of life improvements on the book like that. And the plan is to do that with all of them. I anticipate that there will be less and less of that gets done as I go through the series, but there are things where I've like changed terminology a little bit. Like I've maybe clarified something or like picked a different word for something. And
there's been a couple of those things that I've actually marked in that Google Doc that I've given you for Howling Dark, where I have it labeled as like a continuity or consistency error, but I don't like actually give a suggestion for the fix. I just ask a couple questions. It's just like, whatever the question is. Like one of them was how high matter specifically was described, and I was like, this seems different than how it was described in the later books, and then gave examples, but stuff that you can look through when you're fixing it to see if that's something that you need to change.
yeah,
Just
yeah. No, I really appreciate you doing all of that. But I'm gonna get into that hopefully October-ish. Because I will be doing that for Howling Dark, and then I will be working on the outline for book 7. Which is super weird to say out loud.
right, yeah, the last book of the main series.
It's super weird to be as far as I am, but to be starting the last book is kind of surreal. Um, the thing too is that it's actually mostly done because in the back and forth with Daw, where we thought, hey, is gonna be one more book, it's gonna be two more books. I actually went through and I outlined
Right.
the end of everything. So
Back when
I
you thought
outlined
that
the whole thing
Disquiet
as one
Gods
giant
might
book.
be one.
Yeah,
Okay, that makes
yeah, yeah.
sense.
So I outlined the whole thing. None of what is now Disquiet Gods changed. Like it was it was the outline up through chapter 55 in the outline. It's actually there's 67 chapters. So things kind of got out of hand, but as I kept working on it, but in the combined outline I did, it's up through chapter 55 is the story. So it ended where it was supposed to end, but everything after that I outlined was book 7 stuff. So I find myself in a similar position to where I was with Kingdoms of Death and Ashes of Man, where they said, "Hey, this is going to be 2 books," and I had a pretty clean, obvious place to break, and everything before that break was Kingdoms of Death, and I basically had to do no work on it. I think I had to add like one chapter um, to make it work, but then Ashes of Man, I had to like write a whole first half for. Um, I'm in the same position where like all of the Battle of Godolphin stuff is done, basically in outline. I've already outlined all of
Right,
it.
right.
The whole back half of the book is good to go. I just kind of have to sort out a new first arc, really, basically, or first couple of arcs to round everything out. So I don't think the outlining is going to take me very long. I think probably October I will finish the outline. I may even start writing in October on book 7, and so I'll do that, and I'll work on the Diamond Edition for Howling Dark probably around then, and then of course the Diamond Editions for Empire of Silence should start going out November, December. Hopefully that won't take too long. I have a bunch of people I plan on enlisting to help get them out the door
Right.
into the post office. So that'll be like a whole event, but hopefully not a very long one. 1,000 books is a lot to mail, but it's not
Yeah.
too much for half a dozen people. So we'll have like a little assembly line, sign and pack and things, and we'll get everything rolling. So yeah, things are very busy, but we're in a pretty good spot, I think. And by the end of the year, I should be well on my way to actually eating this sun. So um,
To actually getting to the pivotal, it's sun eating time.
it's sun eating time. Yeah. Uh,
How long do you like, just as a, obviously even before you do the full outline, where on the scale of Sun Eater do you think book 7 will fall between the Ashes of Man length versus the Disquiet Gods length? So the
I'm sure it'll be
200,000 to
longer. Yeah.
okay.
I'm sure it'll be closer to 300,000 than to two. My hope is that it's like my hope with Disquiet Gods was that it would be about a quarter million words, and I would like to get down to that with the last book again, and get close to like 250. If it goes a little bit over, it goes a little bit over. But my goal is around 250.
That's where Howling Dark was, right? Right around
Yeah,
260.
thereabouts. It's like 255, 260, somewhere in there.
Okay, yeah,
Um,
that makes sense then. Because I was like, if we're
yeah,
gonna have another chunky one, and I expected you to get the two longest books independently into one book.
yeah. No, it's just not.
Hilarity.
It was not mathematically possible. And I wasn't going to let business considerations ruin the end of the series. I understand business considerations, and I'm not like, you know, a lot
Right,
of
but
people are like, wow, like we should get our pitchforks and burn Daw down. Like I'm not that guy, right?
yeah,
Like they
but
have had their reasons,
and from the other
but I
point of
have
view,
mine.
even if they did want another book one, for example, which would be from a business perspective better than a book seven, if you were to finish off book six in a very short time and it, poop the bed, so to speak, then a lot of people would be like,
Yeah, don't know that
not
I'm gonna
wanting to
buy
buy the
another
next
series.
book anyway, like is
Exactly,
he going to
right? Like
ruin the end of this series too?
that's my primary fear is that if I uh took the offer and I finished the book, finished the series in one short book, which is what they wanted, um, then I would have gotten a reputation for being one of those writers who like, man, that was really promising,
You would have gotten the
but
Brent Weeks treatment.
yeah, he has no idea how to wrap up a series, and so I don't know, man. And like I think I do know how to wrap up this series, and so it would be especially frustrating to fail for reasons other than just being mediocre.
Especially when we
Um,
knew the end from the first page.
right. Yeah, that would also make it worse, right?
Yeah,
Is like,
like
oh,
he
we
obviously
knew
knew
where
what he
this
was
was
going to
going.
do, but didn't do it.
Yeah, exactly. So trying to avoid all of that, but I, maybe I still will, right? Maybe I'm just talking a mean game, and book seven will come out. People like Christopher, really, like it's so lame. Because like you can't. There's gonna be some of that, right? Like I'm trying to be pretty sanguine about this because um, there's a lot of sort of grace that readers have. Like if they're watching a series, like I don't really like this direction that much. I'm not so sure about the whole I don't know, cosmic horror angle. Like that's not what I wanted the series to be or something. And if the series, say, doubles down on that angle as it gets into its final act, people are like, yeah, it's not really what I wanted Sun Eater to be. Well, Sun Eater is what it is. And so if people don't like that, that's fine. So there are going to be people who are like, I don't like it anymore. I thought the first two books were really promising, but then after that, blah blah blah. Like it's gonna happen.
Right,
Um,
right.
but I do hope that when people read book six and seven here, that they say, "Man, those are the best books six and seven Christopher could have written." Because endings are hard, and in a certain sense, I've never written one. So
Right,
I'm trying
right.
to be humble about that fact.
You've written the ends of arcs, but not really true
But
ends.
not
Because like
ending.
I feel
Yeah.
like Empire Silence and Howling Dark are the first act of the series. After all of that, Hadrian gets enlisted to be a knight, essentially. And that's the second act through the end of Ashes of Man. And clearly, if you've read Ashes of Man, like that's the end of the second act, man. Like that's a huge shift right there.
Oh, big time. Yeah.
So so
Yeah.
that'll be interesting. But
Yeah.
but
No,
I
I
mean,
think that breakdown's right.
yeah, and at least in that sense, if there are people who aren't like super hot on six and seven, it's more preference or taste or something like that, rather than he just objectively failed the last book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, there's
because
a
if
long
there's either way to
tradition.
lean, preferably
Yeah.
the taste is where you want to go, rather than he just. Uh.
What you want to have happen, right, is you want because like you lose readers book to book, right?
Yeah,
Usually you see something like a 50% drop off between books one and two. Like that's pretty normal in publishing. But then it starts to flatten out. It's sort of I guess that's an exponential curve, right?
yeah, it's the opposite of
Um,
Zipf's law.
Yeah, so you lose fewer and fewer people between like books four and five. What you hope happens is that the series becomes more what those people who've stayed through the whole time want it to be. right?
Yeah.
But there is a proud tradition in science fiction of these long series like just completely going off the rails the further they go in there. And I promise I'm not talking about Dune, but I'm talking about Dune. I have like no idea like Heretics and Chapter House like what the plan was there. I love Frank Herbert, but
I
I just
mean,
don't
it
get
is
it.
to the point that like there are countless different people who are just like only read Dune, only read through Messiah, only read through Children, only read through God Emperor, or read the whole thing. Like you get all 5 of those frequently.
Right, but you never get to only read through Heretics,
Yeah,
right?
exactly, because it's the
Like
last
that's
two.
right. Yeah, it's those last two books. You know, and there are others, right? You know, I have never read past Ender's Game, but my understanding is that people are a lot cooler on Xenocide and Children of the Mind than they are on Ender's Game and Speaker for the Dead, right? So like there's a tendency for these long series to like really lose people. And this is something that I'm trying to keep an eye on very consciously. Like I really hope that my mother is right, and Disquiet Gods is the best one so far. That would be really good news. But there's an article I read a couple weeks ago. I think it was RF Kwan was talking about how she loves Goodreads because she loves reading the reviews, but like we shouldn't rate books. We shouldn't have numbers for books, right? They're not toothpaste. And I think that that is like completely wrong. I think she has it completely backwards. I think any individual review is like, you know, I don't want to say essentially useless because like you do reviews, right? But
Right.
you go to a reviewer for a review, either hear your own opinion and be like, this person is right. I we are both very smart, or because you trust that reviewer and you're like, I want to hear what this one person's opinion is, right? Reading an
Right.
individual review, like for me as an author, like trying to get a sense of like what people think about my work is actually worthless,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
What I need to know is like what is the emergent data, right? I need to see like, does everybody think the book is good, right? Or does everybody think the book is bad? And how do they feel over time? Like, is the if the thing is like really positively reviewed at first and then it like gets bad, that means it was like running entirely on like, you know, on like nostalgia, right? I think like the latest Zelda game is kind of like this. Now I love Zelda. I thought Tears of the Kingdom was pretty good, but like it is just better Breath of the Wild
Right.
in like
Right.
it, you know, there's they didn't actually do anything like especially narratively that was like really mind-blowing and crazy,
They just
right?
improved the sandbox.
They
That was really
dramatically
what they did.
improved on Breath of the Wild, right? And it's super fun. I played it for dozens of hours, right? But it's still like it's not the Wind Waker. It's not Majora's Mask, right? Like it's not quite there, right? And you've seen that, like the conversation about that. Like it spiked really, really high, and people a couple months have passed and they're like, look, I'm gonna poke my head up and just say, guys, maybe it's not that good, right? Like maybe it's just okay. So like these sort of trends are the real information, right? And so you know, you know, I try to keep an eye on that sort of thing rather than read individual reviews. And so far, it seems like everybody keeps getting, you know, more pleased. So I'm hoping that that means I'm moving in the right direction. So I'm gonna just keep doing that until I run into a landmine. So
See, I was thinking a little bit on that point that you just made about individual reviews being worthless in the scope of actually determining like what's working and what isn't. Uh,
yeah,
because there's a reason that aggregate scores are used, you know, in basically any entertainment medium, regardless of, you know, the biases or anything like that associated. But, you know, people use Goodreads scores as a sort of way to gauge stuff. If the score of a series goes down over the course of it, that changes the way someone's going to feel versus, you know, the when it goes up, which is traditionally the trend that you see because the people who are continuing to read are the people who are continuing to like it usually.
yeah, yeah. No,
But
that's
it, the only time when I think individual reviews matter is when you have individual reviewers who you learn the taste of and therefore are able to relate, you know, your tastes with. Like this is what I do with plenty of reviewers, not just for books but also for gaming as well. It's like I know how this person feels about these types of games versus these types and all of this. So when they review any type of game, I can use that as reference for like, okay, well these might be things that I click with even though he doesn't like them or vice versa. And that's something that I
yeah,
use. So even though I may not agree with a particular reviewer. If you watch enough or read enough of their reviews on various different things, you learn their taste and therefore are able to use that on an individual basis. But
No, absolutely. That is exactly. That's what the individual critic is good for from like a consumer standpoint,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
even from like my standpoint, right? There are a couple people who I know like really like not just my stuff, but the sort of thing that I'm aiming at, right? And so if those people still reliably like, what I am doing, then I am doing the right thing,
right,
right? Because from a sort of market standpoint, right? Like I don't want to become something other than what I am, right? Because like you want to be, like if you're a metal band, I've used this analogy before. You want to make a really good metal album. You don't want to make a really good jazz album, right?
right,
Now,
right,
like that would be kind of cool. Like I want to hear Judas Priest use the saxophone. I think it'd be great. But at the same time, there'd be a lot of people like, "What is this, Judas Priest? Like
right,
you could have made another metal album, but you made this instead." So, if you've got people who like have a very clear sense of like what your work is as art, right? Those people are worth paying attention to as an artist. But just like casually seeing the individual opinions of individual people, right? Like I don't read Goodreads, right? I don't read reviews. I might watch like a booktube review because I know a lot of booktubers at this point. So like
right.
it's like those opinions sort of matter to me on like a more individual basis.
A little
But
bit more of a personal take in a
right, in
way,
exactly the way that I'm talking about, right?
right? Like, what
But
does
like
my
I don't go
friend think of
casually.
this rather than what does this
Yeah,
reviewer think of it? Right,
exactly. And like I expect those people now because I know what they're like and what they like. Those opinions are more valuable. But like just reading individual opinions is worthless on Goodreads. Goodreads is only useful to me in that it gives me data.
yeah, it gives
Um,
you an aggregate
you
score
know,
essentially.
so I thought that, and I forget why we sort of got onto this particular topic, but I remember reading this thing, and this is exactly backwards, right? Like the only thing that I need from Goodreads is that number, right? It would be
Right,
really nice if I could have that number on like a graph, and like maybe you can somewhere on Goodreads, right? And say like, oh, it's been, like it was 4.5, and now it's 4.2, and then it's up to 4.3 again, like whatever, right? Like that would be interesting.
right.
Um, you know, uh,
I'd wonder if
because
Storygraph has some of that stuff because they have a lot more of the statistics than Goodreads does, but I
yeah,
don't know if they have that particular type of
yeah.
statistics that like an author could look at. That would be an interesting thing on the author profile if they could do.
Yeah,
I have
that'd be
no
really
clue.
cool. Because I personally think that like you that objective like quality in art exists, right? It's just that you need more than one person to determine it, right?
Right? It's
I
more of
think
an
that like if
average
a book
than
if a book is universally acclaimed over time by a large number of people, then it is objectively good, right? Like Lord of the
right,
Rings is objectively good because it is still being read in huge volumes, right? And most of the people who read it think it's great, right?
right,
And if you can
right.
average the opinion of a large vector of humanity, right, over a huge swath of time, right, 75 something years,
And you can even get a
then
more objective look on even individual elements within something like that. Because even Lord of the Rings, generally the most ired part of it is Bombadil. That's the one thing that
my boy.
generally you start to see the most sway on within Fellowship, at least. And then, of course, describing the trees. But we've already talked about this specific thing many times before.
Yeah.
It's
Uh,
thematically important, okay? But
it is so important. You just don't understand, bro.
Scouring of the
Yeah,
Shire is the best chapter in Lord of the Rings. Don't fight me.
yeah, no, I would never because you're right.
Right? Or
But
don't at me, rather.
yeah, and that's why the trees have to be green because we have to be sad when they're gone. Come on, guys, get with it. This is not rocket science; it's literary criticism. You know, it's much easier. But yeah, no. So I guess the point is that like, I only hope that I'm sort of trending in the right direction, right?
Right.
So
Well, for me,
I
I would
guess we'll
say
see.
you are, even though, Howling Dark may be my second favorite of the series, but Ashes of Man is my favorite, and it's my all-time number one, so that kind of says something.
Man, that's not
In
nothing. Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah.
Tales 3, the two, last stories in the collection are definitely in my top 5 of the Sun Eater short stories. Potentially both top 3 alongside Parliament. Um, all of that kind of stuff that's going on. But for me, I think you've got a lot of promise. But that's why I've made that's why I've made such a point. That's just like, I don't love ebooks or reading things digitally generally, but like, I'm gonna do that for Disquiet Gods because my heart needs to be
Well,
torn in two again, Christopher.
oh well, it will be. It will be. You know, people are really funny. They say things like, "Well, he can't possibly hurt us again. He killed all of the characters," and I'm just like, "You idiots."
Yeah, it's like, you
Uh,
literally just killed everybody, and then Christopher comes right back around, slaps you in the face, and says, "No, I did not kill everybody."
everybody so far. No. But there are always new there are always new ways that I can get you all. Yeah, no.
For
But
me, it'll be watching my character brutalized in the last book.
that is true. You are one of the people who that's the thing that I need to do in revising book 6 is I need to get your cameo in there, because for those who don't know, there are a few people on the Kickstarter who bought deaths in the series, either in the last couple of books or in the side project. I've gotten a couple of them killed off already between Lorien and some of the short stories, but yeah, everybody I asked, like, which one do you want to be in, and everyone said book 7. I'm like, okay, this is now officially a useless question. So some people have to die in the Lorien book. But I've been working on it. So
Does anybody
um,
die in book 6? Do any of those
uh,
appear?
n- not yet, but I am gonna work. I'm gonna work one person in for sure.
Okay.
Because book 6 was like already written.
Right.
But
Right.
I found a place to fit one other person. So um and the character that I'm going to turn into your cameo is in book 6 and 7, very like marginally. Yes, like maybe like a line of dialogue or two, right? And because none of these are very big, none of these
Right.
are very big
Right.
characters. The point of the tier, right, was like, this is like a cool little cameo thing. It's
Yeah.
like not, like, I'm gonna make a character and they're gonna get a whole book, and then you're gonna, yeah, it's not like, not like that, right?
Probably have to
I
pay a
used to
lot
do
more than
that.
what we did.
Yeah, yeah. I will write a book on commission. $2 million. But yeah, no. I used to do that when I was writing in college. I was like, I named minor characters after friends all the time, and then they would be like, "Oh, can my character?" And like, oh, we're not doing this anymore. So I kind of stopped doing that.
That makes
Um,
sense.
yeah, it got out of control. But I thought this would be a fun thing to do, right? I have a reputation for killing people in horrifically inventive ways. And so I was like, why don't I just kill readers for fun and profit? So thought I would do that. I don't know that I'm going to make a habit of it, but I thought it was a fun thing to do at least the once. So
Yeah, at least for the Kickstarter, it's kind of a special occasion, right?
yeah, exactly,
And then
exactly. So
kind of one final thing. I know this is, a little bit longer in the future as you still have to do book 7, but and this has been asked a million times before, including in your live streams, but do you have ideas for what
oh
you might
sure.
want to approach next?
I don't have a shortage of ideas, actually. I can think of at least half a dozen projects I might do next. I don't know which one I will do next. I know that I'm not going to do a giant series next.
Right,
Whatever I
yeah,
do
of
is going
course.
to be either a standalone novel or nothing longer than a trilogy, just because I need a break. I also have a lot of these like little ideas, and they're starting to like float around in my head all the time. And I've talked about this before. There are scenes, right, that like for the Coliseum scene in Demon in White, I thought about just like in a vacuum. Was like, oh, this would be a really cool like moment for like years and years and years and years and years. And I would think about it almost on a daily basis. I'm like, we gotta get someone to catch the sword, right? And like that'll be cool. And as soon as I wrote it, I stopped thinking about it all the time. And I'm to this point now with a lot of these book ideas where they're just like in there, and I like need to get them out of there. So I think I'll do a lot of standalones. Some of them are um, like more obviously Sun Eater universe than others. Some of them are in the same continuity, but less obviously so, less directly connected. And some of them aren't at all. There are a couple fantasy ideas for reasons of metal bands producing jazz albums. I'm not sure if I'll do that next, or
Oh, right.
if I do make a fantasy book, I might not do it in like the most obvious way. right? Like maybe I'll try some other publishing method for it just so that I don't waste a shot at bat. Because
Right.
my fear is that I write a fantasy book and all the people who come to me for science fantasy will be like, what did you do? Why is he
Right.
abandoning us?
Because it's more your
Um,
dedicated readership at this point that is wanting to see your take on fantasy versus
yeah, it's a minority of people who are like, you know, Christopher should really write is epic fantasy. It's not most people. I think most people are like, Son of Your Thing's pretty good. More of that, please. Right? And I want to make sure that I'm cognizant of what the readership's wishes are. Not in a, there's sort of like this tension for writers, right? Because you don't want to write exactly what people expect because then you're boring, right? But you don't want
right.
to go like you don't want to subvert expectations too hard that you lose half your ticket sales.
Right. You don't
You
want the
know,
dreaded subvert expectations that's become
right.
the it's become the cliched line that's like actually not a great thing to hear anymore.
Right. It's a good sign that the people who are working on whatever it is don't actually care. They,
Or that they didn't
about what they're
try. They just
yeah,
did it because
exactly.
they needed to, or
Wouldn't it be exciting and subversive if we ruined everything? Yes.
right.
And the answer is no. Like it wouldn't be. That sounds terrible. But you do want to surprise your readers, right? You want to give them, and this like sounds maybe pretentious, and I don't mean it to, but you want to give your readers the thing something they would never know to ask for, right? But
Right.
that is what they want. And then like that's hard, right? Like I don't know necessarily like what that is, but you want to surprise people in a way that like seems obvious in retrospect,
I think
right?
this is
Like
something
that's
that I don't know if it was Sanderson, but I think Sanderson might have said this before. It's the idea of, somebody wants, you have a kid, whatever, you like make them like paper origami things or whatever. You make them a boat and they just really like the boat, so you make them another one. But then eventually you're just like, well, I want to make them this plane. They don't know they want the plane, but I'm going to make them the plane, and then they get it and they love it. It's the idea of trying to predict what it is that they want without knowing they want it.
yeah, exactly. And this is where the creativity comes in, right? You have to people think, right, people who don't like Empire of Silence mostly don't like it because it looks a lot like Dune in its first 100 pages, right?
The
And so
first
they think
act
this
definitely references Dune quite a bit.
a lot, yeah, and that's like super super on purpose, right? But that's super because Sun Eater is not Dune. It
Right.
is sort of thematically the exact opposite of Dune, actually. And so what I wanted to do was as I had this hunch, and I've talked about this before, that like the reason that people drop off on Dune is because the later Dune books do not deliver on what people feel the promise of the first book is. They
Right.
they they read the first Dune book and they're like, "This is a hero's story," and Frank Herbert's like, "No, it's not." And like, Frank, it is though, right? Only the epigraphs say that it's not. In the first book, like Paul is just the good guy, right? Like he doesn't do anything objectionable to the audience at all, right? And then the next book is like he's Hitler actually, and I'm like, we didn't see him do anything remotely Hitlerish actually, even once.
Didn't
And
even
so people
suggest it.
yeah, no, like I mean, Princess Irulan's like, ooh, Paul's kind of scary, but he's scary because he like beat the Harkonnens. So like, okay, right? It just
Yeah, but
doesn't
The
work, right?
Harkonnens are objectively the bad guys,
They're
so
objectively worse, right? Like maybe the
yeah.
Atreides aren't as good as they're made out to be. I don't know, but they're not the Harkonnens, right?
Right.
And so when you get later into the books, people are like, I don't know about this, man. Like this is not what I signed up for. And so I hope that what I did was capture the people who like had the same kind of feeling, basically, right?
Right.
And so you have to like sort of put your finger on these pulses and hope that what you're feeling is a pulse and not something else, right? And so, um,
I love that one of the ways that you kind of manage to do that as well is by the framing of the narrative, being from Hadrian 1500 years later, or however many years. It's a long time.
it's about 15, yeah, yeah,
uh, being like, you know, specifically commenting on his own comments from earlier. This is one all the time when Hadrian's just like, "Oh, I can do this thing." And 1500 years later, he's like, "I was wrong." Oh, how
yeah.
wrong I was. It's a direct
That
quote
was
that
a
he
lie.
says multiple
Yeah,
times. Like, yeah, and that's one of the great ways to kind of do that is because you have this idea of Hadrian This is something that I'm seeing more in the reread as well. You have this idea of Hadrian as being the hero, but there being a very uh I can't think of the word at the moment, but there's an
Okay.
undertone there. There's an undertone that's like you kind of start to see that the further the books go on, it becomes a lot more obvious. Uh, Especially once you get into, Kingdoms of Death and Ashes of Man, where it's like, okay, yeah, this is a major turning point for Hadrian as a person, especially after the end of Howling Dark. Because that changes a lot, but rereading Empire of Silence and Howling Dark had me going through and being like, things were my first time reading. I was like, I agreed with younger Hadrian. It's like my ideals were like matching that. But on the reread, I don't. I can't get behind it at all. I'm just like, I know where this goes. Like, stop. And I
Well, that's really encouraging to hear, right? Because at a certain level, the series is a thought experiment, and it is to see if I can change people's minds.
right.
Uh,
And for
you
me,
know,
it's completely worked because the way that
yeah,
I felt about younger Hadrian the first time around was that was me. The way that I read books is even if the main character's, female or completely different demographically from me, like the way they grew up or everything, I become the main character. That's how I read. That's how I become emotionally invested. Is
yeah,
that becomes my person. So that was me with Hadrian the first time around, very clearly. So I was experiencing the way that he was thinking and the way that he saw the world and the way that he wanted to see the Sealson, especially from that perspective. Whereas on the reread, now that I know where it goes, and especially after, I was put into a catatonic state after chapter 42 of Ashes of Man, I was staring at nothing for an hour. Um I go through and I read and I see everything different. I don't agree with young Hadrian at all. Like I see what he's trying, you very clearly understand what he's going for, but you're like, oh my sweet summer child. It's
yeah. Well, the hope basically, right, is that the first time through, you empathize with character Hadrian, and the second time, it's narrator Hadrian,
exactly
in a
that's
sense,
that's
right?
basically the one
Um,
sentence way of putting how I feel. My mind is
yeah, because
completely changed on Hadrian's perspective.
yeah, this is something Gene Wolfe said, right? Like, he talks about wanting to give people sort of the most value for their book possible, right? And the way to do that is to make a book that you can read more than once successfully, right? And so,
And
you know,
especially if it's
I
dramatically different.
yeah, this is why, like, I don't care about spoilers very much, just in general. Is if spoiling a book like makes the book unreadable, it's not a good book, right? If you know, like, oh, he blows up a sun at the end, right? And that like ruins the story for you. Which like there are a few reviews where people are like, I thought this book was dumb because I know the ending already. I'm like, bro, if you think you know the contents of book five by reading book one, you are stupid and fooling yourself, right? Like,
If you
you
think you know what Kingdoms of Death and Ashes of Man did to me just reading the first chapter of Empire of Silence, I'm sorry, but you don't know anything.
Yeah, that's crazy, right? Because like a book is an experience, and you can't actually have the experience by like knowing plot points, right?
Right.
And if the book is, the kind of book where you do have the experience by reading the Wikipedia article, then it's not worth reading. And you just read the Wikipedia
If
article.
that's all there
Um,
is to the experience, because like I
right.
I care about spoilers a lot, but a lot of that is because of a first go around. I tend to appreciate um rereads, just generally
Yeah.
speaking. Um if for nothing else than for foreshadowing purposes, because it's fun to see how much an author knows where they're going and how they get there in ways that a first time reader doesn't know about. But I definitely see where you're coming from. If you
Yeah, I
can't
don't
read
mean
a
to imply
book,
that there's like you shouldn't care about spoilers right
right,
now. I
right,
don't very much because like I care about the other things more, right? And obviously, like being surprised is part of the initial experience,
exactly,
but it's incomplete, right? It's not the only thing.
right,
Like, I very frequently will read the Wikipedia summary of a movie before I go. Um, uh, just because if it's going to be really stupid, then maybe I won't go, right?
fair enough.
And I save myself hours and tens of dollars, and so but often, right? Like if I read something that sounds really cool, right? Then it's the execution, right? It's the cinematography, it's the music, it's all the other elements
It's the more
together that like
objective quality of it.
yeah, well, it all builds this sort of experience, right? And you know, you can't get that from just reading a summary, right? And you know, like movies that are bad or that are only as good as the summary, right? Now still have those other things. Like you can enjoy a terrible movie or enjoy a terrible book, but uh, you know, if you know in advance, right? Like maybe you don't spend your time. So that's why I do, right? Now, like I fully acknowledge that I'm very weird in this
Right,
way, right?
right,
I totally get that, but it at least as a writer, that same impulse I think makes me inclined to write this kind of book that has, um, you know, I have both of my eyes at all times on rereading and on, you know, on that sort of repeat experience, which requires that there be, you know, more than just whatever's happening, right? There
right.
needs to be something else to be worth rereading. And so I think my like lack of concern for spoiler culture is the reason why I'm that way.
I
If
see
that makes
that
sense.
because for me it's more like the going in blind is the initial experience, but if you know knowing what's going to happen means that there's nothing worthy in the book, I definitely see where you know it's just not a good book comes from
Yeah. Now
because
I'm like
there
super judgmental about like creative
touche,
projects, right? Like you know,
right?
like I'll you know I my brother does not like to go to movies with me anymore because all I do is complain about them when I come out. You know, we're leaving the theater. He's like, "What did you?" He's like, what did you think?" I'm like, "Do you want to know, right? Or like, did you have a good time?" And he's like, "I thought it was pretty good," and I'm like, "It was okay," you know. Like, so,
I won't tell
you
you
know,
the reasons why it wasn't great.
unless you want to know. You know, we went to you know talked about the Flash earlier, right? That was the last movie I saw in theaters, and it was terrible. And even we came out he was like, "What did you think?" And I was like, "Do you really want me to tell you?" Right? And he was like, "Yeah, it wasn't very good, was it?" And, and I was like, "Okay, fine, here we go." Right? No, it was in fact terrible. It was nice to see Michael Keaton again, but everything else was bad. So
Right.
uh, at least you know your mileage may vary, but it was kind of a mess.
Right, right. I
Oh man.
basically don't watch movies, so that's not something I'd ever see myself getting to a point of doing, just because the only movies that I'm going to watch are the ones that I'm relatively confident in seeing, such as,
You know,
like,
I go socially, right? My brothers like to go see films, so I usually end up going.
right.
But
I basically never watch movies. In fact, the fact that I went to the theaters twice in 4 days. Is that how time works? You know, at the end of July said something a lot because I was like, oh, well, new Mission Impossible. I like Mission Impossible movies. Let's just go and watch that because my dad really likes those. I'll take him to the theater. So we did. And same thing with watching Sound of Freedom the next week was because I was like, oh, I missed this when it was the theater here. Let's go on a road trip with my brother who wants to watch it because I want to watch it. Uh, but there are so few movies that I ever feel
yeah,
interested in watching
no,
that,
I mean that is increasingly true.
yeah.
You know, I'm not anticipating anything until Dune, so
Yeah,
it's gonna be a minute.
I'm I'll probably watch part two in the theater. I didn't watch part one in the theater, but I did watch it before I read the book actually, and
Oh,
really
cool.
enjoyed it. We could have an entirely different conversation on Dune if we wanted to, as you know, someone who knows a lot about it and someone who's watched the movie twice and read the first book once and nothing else. You know,
Yeah,
uh, but I really enjoyed the movie for what it was. It required a second watch for me to understand it because there's a wee bit of you know build up and names and stuff that you don't
it's
understand.
pretty high barrier to entry. You know,
Yeah, and I actually thought when I read the book, I was like, I was all the better for watching part one before I read it because beyond the essentially the cold open on whatever I forget what
Caladan.
the
Yeah,
say what
Caladan.
yeah. I was like, besides the cold open, I don't know how much of early Dune I could have gotten through without losing my mind reading it because there's a lot. It is a lot, and I was
It
still
is pretty
relatively early in
unforgiving.
my reading journey at that point. Like I'd
Yeah,
just started
it's
rereading again and or reading again and late-ish 2021, and I read this in February 2022. I'd gone through the Lord of the Rings, and that was like the main thing that was like, I need to get this done before I really start expanding what I'm reading. And then it was Dune, and it would have been too much without the movie.
Yeah, no, it is tough. I read Dune for the first time when I was in 7th grade, and I did not. I kind of bounced off of it pretty hard, but I was like, "This is really cool." I will try again. I eventually ended up getting the audiobook from the library and like ripping MP3s of the CDs, uh, so that I could listen to it because even early on I came to realize that my retention was a lot better when I got audiobooks. So once I did that, it was much easier. So, and that was sort of like before Audible was a thing. So going to the library and ripping MP3s was sort of the way to go.
Right.
Um,
For me, it was like going to the library and there would be CDs of audiobooks, so there weren't that many of them because CD audiobooks are, $50
yeah. Oh
or
gosh.
more,
Yeah.
if they're bigger. So yeah, it makes a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I had the Lord of the Rings box set. I think it was like $150, something crazy.
Right. Yeah,
Those
that makes
those are the
sense.
only audiobooks I owned on CD. So I listened to this is why I've read Lord of the Rings like 100 times. It's the only book I had. So I would just fall asleep all through grade school listening to Lord of the Rings over and over and over again. So this is my origin story. That's my radioactive spider is is Lord of the Rings audiobooks on loop for like 12 years.
Yeah, I
Oh,
mean, it's really good. For me, it was the fact of I read The Hobbit for the first time in 6th grade for me, so it wasn't that long ago. Just make everybody feel old by saying what year I graduated, but 6th grade was when I read The Hobbit for the first time. Uh, and then I tried reading Fellowship at that point, and I was too young. I bounced off, at the point when everybody else bounces off at the Old Forest, basically. Is that what the chapter's called? I think I remember that being the title.
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, chapter 6 of book 1. I think it might be chapter 5. I don't remember. Either way, I bounced off
Uh,
around that part.
I think it's chapter 5, I
It's
think.
somewhere around halfway through book 1. Um, but then I bounced off there. But then in freshman year, I reread Fellowship of the Ring and got through it quite quickly. But when I'm recalling anything about my Lord of the Rings experience back then, I don't remember any of it. Like I just didn't remember it for one reason or another. And I remember starting The Two Towers and getting through that over the course of months and reading it over like camping in the summer. And then I never started Return of the King because at that point I was mood reading, and therefore that meant that I was reading like 15 books at a time and finishing one of them. It was a problem.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm so strict with my reading schedule now, is because if I mood read, I'm going to go right back into that. It's going to be a problem. But then I never actually got through Lord of the Rings until 2021, basically
Oh,
October
wow.
through
Yeah.
January 22, and that was when I read it. And Return of the Kings is
That's so
amazing.
good.
I love it. I loved it.
It is the one book that reliably moves me to tears. It's just so sublimely beautiful and in like very small human ways. Like that whole back, basically everything after the ring is destroyed, is just so just heartbreakingly wonderful and
Right.
sad and but also not sad. It's just a tremendous accomplishment. I say frequently, right, that like it's the only great fantasy novel. I strongly believe it will be read in 1,000 years, and I as strongly believe that no other 20th century fantasy novel will be. Um, and obviously, like I can't be proven wrong because we'll all be dead, but I think I'm right. And I will hold to that position. But it is my favorite book, and the competition is like not even close. Like Book of the New Sun is behind it, but it's not right behind it. It's as much as I love Gene Wolfe, and everyone knows I love Gene Wolfe. It is a distant second.
But that's
So
what's exciting about it for me is I had mentioned to you a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I don't remember when, it was probably 2 weeks ago, that I had started reading Silmarillion because the local Tolkien scholar, Baba from uh,
oh yeah, yeah.
Mike's server, decided he was going to start his reread, and he said he was going to do like one chapter a week, and I'm like, I can get behind that pace. Let me join you.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
the right speed to read the Silmarillion. Reading the Silmarillion is like reading the Old Testament. There's like
right, Right.
very little reason to read all of it in order, all at once. Like, it's not that kind of book.
Right.
You know,
And I've already gotten that vibe from the first two chapters. You know, I knew Lindale, or however it's pronounced, and then the
I know
Valaquanta.
Lendele. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Um,
was like, I, I love it so far. The very first chapter was like, this is exceedingly biblical from what I was expecting, and I was actually able to appreciate that more because I had mentioned to you as well that I had started actually trying to read the Bible cover to cover a couple of years ago. I started doing that. I've been slacking hardcore and haven't touched it in a hot minute, much to my own dismay. But
yeah.
I
Well,
have
it's
gotten through
it's
the
also
first few
really hard.
books.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Torah, I'm like 2/3 of the way through the Torah, I think. So I've gotten through at least Genesis and Exodus, and knowing Genesis made the first chapter of this hit a lot different than I think it would have if I had no religious background, for example.
Yeah. Oh no,
But
that's totally true. And what's so amazing about Idle Intellect too is just how much it feels like scripture. Like that's a very hard uh vibe, and I use this word advisedly, to emulate as a writer,
right,
and to emulate sincerely. Most of the time when writers try to emulate the cant of scripture, it sounds pretty tinny and fake.
it
And
feels like
Tolkien,
it's emulating rather than being a genuine
than
early
being in its
writing of the
own.
history. You know.
Yeah, 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 and being sincerely, mythological, as opposed to like this is something we made up. Like I get really turned off when I hear writers talking about their world building, like, uh, you know, like it's like they were building a video game. Like I just don't. Uh, like it makes me worried that that's how much respect they have for the real world, right?
Oh, right,
Um, it makes me very very twitchy. But I'm very twitchy on panels anyway. It's not my favorite environment. Um,
right.
but I'll be interested to hear what you think of the rest of the Silmarillion. I have not read it in a really long time. I really should do that again soon too.
It
Because
was
a lot
just
of Tolkien's best stories are in the Silmarillion. They're just not, dramatized, right?
right,
If he'd gotten to write all of that stuff, with the same resolution that he wrote Lord of the Rings, I think that would really, really something. Now, Children of Hurin is amazing, right? But it is still a fix up job by Christopher, right?
right.
It's not the real and the pure, but it's still really really good.
Right, and
um
that's the one that, like I said, I actually just got my copy recently for it. When we get to that chapter in the Silmarillion, which I think is chapter one of, you know, Quintus
of
Silmarillion,
Quintus Silmarillion, I think it
yeah,
is, yeah.
is we're gonna switch it out for this one, which
And
a
make that
little bit
version,
of me is
yeah.
sad about because man, this edition has some really great art, even beyond what Alan Lee already has in here for that story. So I'm probably gonna reference both of them to be honest, but
Yeah,
I'm really
no man,
excited for that.
yeah,
And
it's so cool.
I'm probably going to reread Lord of the Rings, possibly The Hobbit as well, after I'm done with the Silmarillion as well. So, like, I was like, yeah, I think I just want to reread Lord of the Rings and appreciate it more because it was important for me to get that done as early on in my reading, my coming back to reading essentially. But I'm sure I didn't appreciate it quite at the level I could now.
Well, it's one of those things that only has appreciated in value for me too, right? And like I said, I'm not exaggerating when I say I've been through Lord of the Rings like 100 times, and like I am not tired of it, and I think it only improves. There are very very few books I could say that. A Book of the New Sun, that's like totally true for. It also gets better and better. Um, but Lord of the Rings is just totally unparalleled for me. I can gush about it indefinitely, but you know. We've gone on we've gone on about it for a while anyway, so
Yeah,
I don't want to take up too much of everyone's time.
we can have
But
separate Tolkien conversations later in life.
yeah, 100%. So
Yeah, especially as I get through more of this stuff too, because it'll always be cool to discuss it more deeply. Because I'm somebody who I think one of the reasons why I appreciate the value of rereading so much generally is because I'm much more of a surface level reader the first time around. I go through the story, and that's most of where I'm getting what I appreciate from is like from the basics of it. So that's why certain things I bounce off of if maybe I wouldn't, on a reread there's a book. that I have right up on the shelf up there that I supremely disliked for the most part the first time I read it, but I consider rereading it at some point because I know I wasn't reading it the right way. And of course, there is
Yeah,
actually a right way to read some books.
of course, right? And some things, like, maybe the plot is the weakest part of it, right?
Right.
Maybe there's something else that, like, once you know, like, the plot's, like, it's pretty mediocre, right?
But
Maybe
maybe
there's
the
something else that you
subtext
can
is, just so splendid
is
that like it really speaks to the human condition or whatever it is, because that's how my friends talked
exactly.
about that book, and I was like, dude,
Bro,
part
I
one
don't
was
see it.
5 stars, but the other two parts were terrible. Like, you know, so
Yeah, and like, maybe you end up in a place where you're like, I get why this book is important. It's not my favorite thing, but, like, the author's about something, you know.
yeah, if nothing else,
Um,
want to get to a place of respecting some of that stuff, even if you don't love it,
yeah,
right?
100
But
100%.
Tolkien's one
Yeah.
of those that's like, I read it and I enjoyed it, and Hobbit is one of my favorites. Fellowship, I loved reading that first time around, was really good. I know I need to reread Two Towers because uh, I feel like that was the one that was closest to getting just a 4 star for me when I was rating the trilogy. Uh, for whatever reason, I bounced off of a couple chapters in it, and I don't know why. Book 3, fantastic, but book 4, I don't know why book 4 I just didn't click with the same way as everything else.
I feel the same way. I think the structure of Lord of the Rings works against Two Towers in a certain way. I think because the Aragorn, Gandalf, Rohan stuff is just so dramatic,
It's
that
really good.
that having the, like, back half of the book be Frodo and Sam mostly wandering in the wilderness doesn't balance very well.
Right.
I think it's a structural problem.
Yeah. Having the
But
storylines be fully separated and the telling of it is, to me, a slightly odd decision when I
yeah,
read it that first time.
yeah, it's a very sort of old fashioned decision, and so if anything maybe works against it, it's that, because I often would be like, oh man, I got to deal with Frodo and Sam again, lame. Right when I was a kid, now it doesn't bother me so much because I love Faramir. As I've reread the book so many times, all the things that, like, used to bug me, like, I like anticipate the Bombadil section now. I'm like, we're gonna go see Tom. It's gonna be great.
Right. And I really
Which is
enjoyed the
like,
Bombadil section, actually. That was part of why I really liked Fellowship, was because some of the stuff that didn't necessarily click for some people, I was like, super
this
worked.
is this is delightful. Why is everyone complaining? And, like, the Barrow Wights are so cool, right? So, like, if nothing else, you have to get through Bombadil to have the Barrow Wight sequence. Uh, so I have no complaints.
Right.
Oh man.
Yeah, I'll probably end up doing that probably over next year. It depends on how long it takes to get through some, because if it's only one chapter a week, it'll take until through some point early next year, especially fitting this in separately. But yeah,
Yeah.
and
Well,
my
cool.
my OBS is starting to skip a lot of frames for some reason. I think it's overloading itself, so
Yeah.
I
Well,
think
that
that's a
is
good
that is
place
the
to call it.
signal. Yeah. Yeah. All right, man. Well, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for accepting the offer and then talking for 2.5 hours, basically.
No, no, it was a delight, and thank you again for doing the copy edit. Everything looks great. I'm gonna jump on that on Monday.
We'll
So,
hope it's high enough quality.
no, no, it looked great. So
So,
I'll talk to you soon.
yeah.